The galaxy was old. It had seen wars that burned whole star systems down too. Ash peace treaties written in blood. And great civilizations rise and collapse like waves on a shore. The Galactic Council had watched all of it from its massive station above the planet Veth Prime, a spinning ring of metal and light that housed over 2,000 delegates from 200 civilizations. It was the most powerful governing body in the known galaxy. It had rules for everything. One of those rules was the military asset compliance audit. Every 50 years, every member civilization was required to submit a full and accurate record of its military fleet, ships, weapons, total weight, crew count. All of it had to be registered and declared. The rule existed because nobody trusted anybody, and the council had learned long ago that military surprises tended to end very badly for everyone involved. The audit of 2847 was supposed to be routine. Vale had done 7 of these audits in his long career. He was thin and tall, gray-feathered with thin, long fingers, made for careful data work and a mind that ran on order and clean numbers. He liked audits. Numbers either matched or they didn't. There was no room for feelings or politics. He sat in his small office on Deck 9 of the Council station, surrounded by data chips from 46 civilizations, and worked through them steadily, one by one. The Keth Empire submitted first, as they always did. 12,000 warships. Vale logged it without blinking. The Keth were the largest military power in the Council. Everyone knew it. Their fleet was their identity, their pride, the thing they reminded every other civilization of at every single session. 12,000 ships. He entered the number and moved on. The Lovely submitted 43 ships, mostly light patrol vessels. The Droon had 800. The Savari had 412. Vale worked through the pile without slowing down. Everything was normal. Everything was exactly what he expected. Then he reached Earth. He almost missed it. The human submission was 3 days past the deadline, and it had arrived not through the standard data relay, but hand-delivered by a human delegate. He had looked up from his desk to find a woman standing in his doorway, holding a small silver chip between 2 fingers, smiling pleasantly. Her name was Yuna Shin. She was Earth's senior representative to the Galactic Council, and she had held the position for 11 years. She was not tall. She was not loud. She had short dark hair, neat gray suit, and the kind of calm, steady face that gave nothing away at all, no matter the situation. "Sorry for the delay," she said, setting the chip on his desk. "Formatting issues on our end. All the numbers are correct. I promise." Vale gave a short nod. "I will process it in order." "Of course." She smiled once more and left without another word. Vale set the chip aside and finished the 3 civilizations ahead of it in the queue. Then he picked up the human chip, pushed it into his reader, and waited for the data to load. The first thing his system did was flag an error. He frowned. He checked the chip. Physically, no damage, no dust, no scratches. He pulled it out, cleaned the contact edge carefully, and inserted it again. The system loaded the data a second time. It flagged the same error, but this time it displayed the raw numbers beneath the warning message. Vale read them. He read them again. He leaned forward, closer to the screen, as though the distance between his eyes and the display was somehow causing the Problem. Registered Dreadnought class vessels. 521,400. He sat back very slowly, his gray feathers, which lay flat and smooth against his neck when he was calm, rose up on their own. He stared at the number on the screen. 521,400. Dreadnoughts, the Keth had 12,000 and were considered by half the galaxy to be an existential military threat. Earth was claiming over 500,000. Below the Dreadnought count was a second line: support fleet, frigates, carriers, destroyers, scout vessels, classified. Below that, in the field for total warship tonnage, the system had simply returned an overflow error. It had run out of digits to display the answer. Vale sat very still for a long time. This was clearly a mistake. It had to be. Humans were a quiet species. They attended council sessions on time, voted on minor measures, paid their membership dues without complaint, and mostly stayed far away from the large political arguments that consumed the major powers. They had no territory disputes on file. They had no enemies in the council. They were, if he was being completely honest with himself, one of the least remarkable civilizations he dealt with. The kind of species you forgot was in the room until you checked the attendance list. He ran a full verification protocol. The chip was genuine. The data signature matched Earth's registered government seal exactly. The numbers had not been corrupted, altered, or entered incorrectly. The system confirmed with flat, complete certainty that the data was accurate as submitted. Vale stood up from his chair. He walked to his door and opened it. He stepped out into the hallway. He stood there for a moment, looking at nothing, his long, thin fingers very still at his sides, his mind trying to find some version of the situation that made sense. His legs stopped cooperating, and he sat down on the floor of the hallway. A junior clerk from the Savari delegation walked past and stopped, staring at him with wide, alarmed eyes. "Auditor Vale, are you unwell? Send an emergency message to the Grand Speaker's office," Vale said from the floor in a calm voice. "Tell them we have a compliance issue with the human submission." The clerk hesitated. "A compliance issue? Do you mean the numbers are wrong?" Vale thought carefully about that question. "No," he said, "tell them the numbers are right. That is the problem." Yuna Shin was in the council cafeteria. When her assistant found her, she was eating a bowl of rice with a soft-boiled egg, reading a trade report about a dispute between two species she privately found exhausting. The cafeteria was mostly quiet at this hour. A few delegates from civilizations that ran on different sleep cycles, cleaning drone humming along the far wall, the pale blue light of Veth Prime sitting wide and still in the windows. Behind her, her assistant, Teal Quan, was 26 years old and had been working this posting for exactly 4 months. He was careful and earnest and still genuinely surprised by things which Yuna found quietly endearing. He came through the cafeteria door at a pace that was almost running but not quite, and his face told her everything before he opened his mouth. "They called an emergency session," he said, slightly out of breath. "I know," she said without looking up. "The Grand Speaker's office called me 20 minutes ago." "Yes," she said. Her spoon down, folded the report neatly and looked at him. "Teal, the audit was always going to cause a reaction. We understood that before we submitted." He stared at her. "Then why did we Submit the real numbers. Because the rule says we have to submit. Accurate numbers, she said simply, and we follow the rules. She stood up, picked up her coffee, and nodded toward the door. Come on, it is not polite to keep people waiting at your own emergency session. The council chamber was built to hold 2,000 delegates in tiered seats arranged in a great circle with a wide-open floor. At the center where speakers stood, it had hosted arguments about wars and famines and the end of civilizations. It was a room that had held real history inside its walls. Right now it looked like a crowded room where someone had released something very large and frightening. Delegates were on their feet. Several were speaking at the same time in different languages, all feeding through the translation system at once, creating a wall of noise that pressed against the ears. The Keth delegate, a broad-scaled figure, who had not stood up without being asked to in 30 years of council sessions, was standing. He was staring at the main display at the front of the chamber where the human fleet numbers had been placed in large clean digits for the entire body to see. His face was the color of old stone. Una walked in through the side entrance with her coffee, found her delegation seats and sat down. She crossed her legs and looked at the display board with the expression of someone reading a mildly interesting weather report. Teal sat down beside her and leaned close. They all looked terrified, he whispered. Yes, she agreed. He watched the room for a moment. Are you not even a little worried? Una looked around the chamber at the shouting, the fear. 500 years of galactic military assumptions cracking apart in real time, and thought about the question honestly. Not really, she said. She took a sip of her coffee. We haven't done anything wrong. The Grand Speaker of the Galactic Council was a large, slow-moving creature named Orin. His species, the Vethali, resembled enormous pale frogs with wide, flat mouths and deep-set eyes that had seen more political disasters than most historians could count. He had been Grand Speaker for 31 years. He had handled wars, famines, the sudden collapse of 2 member civilizations, and a very embarrassing incident involving the Keth ambassador and a live animal at the annual summit dinner. He was not a man who panicked easily. He was panicking now. He stood at the center of the council chamber floor, his wide hands raised, trying to bring the room to order. Around him, in tiered rows that stretched up and back like an arena, 2,000 delegates were doing the opposite of being in order. Some were shouting. Some were sending urgent messages on personal devices. The Savari delegation had bunched together in a tight, nervous cluster, clicking softly to one another in their native tongue. The Keth delegate, High Marshal Dren, had sat back down, but he sat very differently now, rigid, straight, with his scaled hands flat on the desk in front of him, his eyes fixed on the number still glowing on the main display screen. 521,400. Dreadnoughts. The number just sat there, calm and enormous, while the room fell apart around it. Order, Orin's voice came through the chamber speakers with enough force to rattle the translation earpieces. This session will come to order right now, or I will clear this chamber and hold the discussion with empty seats. The noise dropped not to silence but to a low, tense hum of whispered conversation and barely contained alarm. Delegates sat down slowly, like animals that had been spooked but hadn't fully decided to run yet. Oren straightened himself and turned toward the human delegation seats. Counselor Shin, the council requires an explanation from Earth's delegation. Immediately. Yuna Shin stood. She had not rushed to stand. She rose the way a person rises when they have been sitting comfortably and are in no particular hurry, set her coffee down on the desk, smoothed the front of her jacket, and walked to the speaker's floor. The chamber watched her in complete silence. She stood at the center of the floor, alone, 2,000 alien eyes on her, and looked completely fine. Thank you, Grand Speaker. Her voice was clear and easy through the translation system. I understand the Council has questions about our fleet submission. I'm happy to answer them. Oren's wide mouth pressed flat. Are the numbers accurate? Yes. All of them. All of them, she paused. I should mention, in the interest of full accuracy, that the number we submitted was actually slightly out of date. 3. New construction runs completed last Tuesday. The current Dreadnought count is closer to 522,000. We will submit the corrected figure by end of day. The chamber did not erupt this time. It went completely silent in the specific way that a room goes silent when something has happened that is too large for immediate noise. Then it erupted. Orlin let it run for 45 seconds. Then he raised his hands again. Enough. The room settled back into its tense, fragile quiet. He looked at Yuna with his deep old eyes. Counselor Shin, Earth has been a member of this council for 180 years. In that entire time, your civilization has never disclosed a military fleet of any significant size. You have never engaged in territorial expansion. You have never been involved in a major armed conflict as an aggressor. You sit on mid-tier committees and you vote on resource treaties. He paused. And you have over 500,000 dreadnoughts. Yes, Yuna said. Why? It was the most important question in the room, and she had known it was coming, and she had thought very carefully about the best way to answer it. She turned slightly and nodded toward the back of the delegation area where Snorts, a woman in a dark blue uniform, had been standing quietly since the session began. I'd like to defer that question to Commander Murray Yoon, Yuna said, Earth's military liaison to the Council. She can explain the doctrine better than I can. Commander Murray Yoon was 38 years old, with a calm, still face and short, cropped hair that made her look like someone who spent a lot of time thinking before they spoke. She walked to the speaker's floor. Without hurrying, stood beside Yuna briefly, and then Yuna stepped aside and her have the space. Murray looked out at the 2,000 faces staring back at her. She had briefed hostile parties before. She had sat across tables from people who wanted things from Earth that Earth had no intention of giving. She was not easily moved by pressure. The fleet exists because we built it. She said simply, we built it because we had a very specific reason to, and because once we started, we never found a good reason to stop. She let that sit for a moment. 180 years ago, when Earth first joined this council, we had already been through something that most of you don't know the details of. We called it the Silence War. A machine intelligence emerged in our outer systems in 2287. Not built by us, emerged. We still don't fully know where it came from. In 6 years, it destroyed 9 of our colony systems, billions of our People gone, entire world silent. She paused. We survived because we built. Faster than it could destroy, we buried it under sheer tonnage. We outlasted it. And when it was over, we made a decision. As a civilization, we decided we would never be caught without enough again. For anything. The chamber was very quiet. High Marshal Dren, the 8th Commander, had been watching Murray with the focused expression of someone who understood military matters and was working through something complicated in his own mind. He spoke for the first time since the session began. His voice was deep and rough and carried the particular weight of someone who had given orders in actual battles. How long ago did you begin your current shipbuilding program? Murray looked at him. We never ended the original one, she said. We adjusted it, updated it, upgraded the designs, but we never stopped building. Dren said nothing. He looked back at the number on the display screen. Something in his face shifted, but Yuna, watching from the side of the floor, could not quite read what it was. The Savari delegate, a small nervous creature named Pell, raised a thin hand. From the upper tier, are the ships are they crewed? Are there humans on board? All of them right now. They operate on minimal automated systems when not in active deployment. Murray said full crew mobilization is possible within 72 hours across all active sectors. Pell made a sound that her translator rendered as a small, soft noise of distress. And the support fleet, another delegate, called out from somewhere in the upper tiers. The submission said classified. It is classified, Murray said. That information is internal to Earth's military command. The Dreadnought count is what the registration requirement asked for. That set off another wave of noise. Oren did not try to stop it this time. He let it roll through the chamber and waited for it to spend itself. Then he looked at Yuna, who had returned to stand just off the speaker's floor, and he asked the question that had been sitting under everything else since the session began. Counselor Shin, this council needs to understand one thing above everything else. Earth has a fleet that dwarfs every other military power in the known galaxy combined, and you have said nothing about it for 180 years. You have made no demands. You have taken no territory. You have asked for nothing that another civilization wasn't willing to give freely. He stopped. Why? What do you want? Yuna looked at him for a moment. She thought about how to say it in a way that would land correctly in every language it was about to be translated into for every kind of mind currently watching her. We want to come home, she said. Every human who goes out into the galaxy, every soldier, every pilot, every engineer on a deep space posting, they all want the same thing, to finish the job and come home. She let the room absorb that. The fleet isn't pointed at anyone in this chamber. It was never pointed at you. It exists so that we can make that promise to our people and actually keep it. The chamber stayed quiet this time, not the panicked quiet of before, but something more uncertain, something that sat between fear and something else, something the translator systems probably didn't have a perfect word for. Teal Quan was watching from the delegation seats. He was 26 years old and had only been doing this job for 4 months, and he had never seen anything like what he was watching. He leaned toward the nearest colleague and whispered, "Is it going well?" The colleague, a veteran of 12 years on the council floor, watched Yuna walking back to her seat with the same easy walk she had arrived with and thought about. "It? I don't know yet," he said honestly. "But it's going." The vote to send a physical inspection delegation to the Sol system passed by a wide margin. It was not a close decision. Nearly every faction in the council, regardless of how they felt about Earth, agreed on one thing: they needed to see it with their own eyes before they could decide how to feel about any of it. Numbers on a screen were one thing, the actual ships were something else entirely. Earth agreed to the inspection without any conditions or delays. Yuna Shin simply nodded when Orin announced the vote result and said, "We'll have everything ready. Let us know when the delegation wants to depart." That willingness to be inspected, the easy, unhurried quality of it, made several delegates more nervous than the fleet numbers had. The inspection delegation was made up of 11 members chosen to represent the major political factions of the council. High Marshal Dran of the Cathar was included over some objections because everyone quietly understood that he was the only one in the delegation who would actually know what he was looking at. Pell, the Savory delegate, was included because she asked to come and nobody had the heart to say no. The Lovery ambassador, a gentle, gray-furred creature named Teva, came along as a neutral observer. The rest were political representatives, bureaucrats, and 2 military analysts from the council's own intelligence division. They traveled aboard a council transport vessel. The journey to the Sol system took 4 days. Nobody talked much during the transit. There was not a great deal to say. They had all read the submitted numbers many times by now. Reading them again didn't help. Admiral John Hobeek met them at the transit point outside the system's boundary. His ship was a single military escort vessel, lean gray and without markings beyond its registration number. He came aboard the council transport to greet the delegation personally, which was not required of him, but which Yuna had suggested in a quiet message before departure. Small gestures of courtesy, she had noted, tend to cost nothing and carry weight. John Ho was a compact, quiet man in his early 50s, with a face that had been out in hard vacuum environments for too many years. He had calm, dark eyes and very little to say when he didn't need to say anything. He greeted each delegate by name, which surprised several of them since they had not expected him to have done that. Preparation. He shook hands where hands were the appropriate custom, made a slight bow where it was not, and then led them back to the council transport's observation deck. "We'll approach from above the plane," he said. "You'll see the outer formations first. I thought that would give you the best view." Nobody asked what he meant by outer formations. They found out 20 minutes later. The transport dropped out of faster-than-light travel above the orbital plane of the solar system, still well outside Jupiter's path around the sun. The observation deck's windows ran the full width of the ship, and every member of the delegation was standing at them when the view resolved. The ships were dark. That was the first thing that registered. They were not lit up or active or broadcasting signals. They floated in the black in complete stillness, arranged in long, perfect geometric lines that stretched so far in every direction that the ends vanished into the dark before the eye could find them. They were enormous. Each dreadnought was longer than some space stations. The delegation had visited. The hulls were matte black, built to absorb sensor signals, which was why no long-range scan had ever returned useful data from this region of space. Up close, without instruments between the eye and the ship, they were simply huge and still and silent, like a mountain range made of metal and floating in the void. Pell made a very small sound. Nobody else made any sound at all. High Marshal Dren stood at the window, with his wide-scaled hands clasped behind his back, and stared for a long time. He was a man who had commanded fleets in 3 actual wars. He knew ships the way a farmer knows land. He had walked through the largest warships in the Keth fleet and felt the specific pride and weight of military power. He had never in his entire life felt small while standing on a warship. He felt very small now. "This is one sector," Jun-Ho said from behind them. His voice was quiet, like someone pointing out a view rather than making a declaration. "Sector 7. There are 12 primary deployment sectors around the system." Dren turned slowly from the window and looked at him. 12 sectors, he said. "Yes. All of them like this. Some are larger," Jun-Ho said. He did not appear to be making a point. He was simply answering the question. They traveled inward toward Jupiter itself, and as they descended toward the great banded planet, the full scale of the Jupiter shipyard ring became visible, a structure that circled the planet like a second set of rings, enormous beyond easy description, lit from within by the continuous glow of active construction. Even now, even during an official inspection, the yards were running. Ships were being built. Hana Lim was already waiting for them in the docking bay of Orbital Station Incheon 7, which sat at the top of the Jupiter ring like a command post above a city. She was a small woman in her mid-40s, with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead and a data tablet tucked under one arm, and she looked like someone who had spent so long in shipyards that the smell of welding had become a comfort to her. She was Earth's chief military historian, brought in specifically for this visit, and she gave the delegation the tour the way a proud homeowner gives a tour of a beloved house. She knew every ship class by name. She explained the construction eras, which designs came from which decade, how the whole technology had evolved, what improvements each generation had brought. She talked about the Dreadnoughts the way some people talked about old books, with a kind of warm, specific love. She pointed at a row of older vessels, the mid-sector, and said with genuine fondness that those ones used to reactor design she had written her graduate thesis on. Then she smiled at the delegation and asked if anyone had questions. Dren stared at her. He had met generals and admirals and military engineers from 20 civilizations. None of them had ever discussed a war fleet with the calm enthusiasm of someone describing a personal hobby collection. He did not know how to process it. Jun-Ho led Dren to a wide observation window at the far end of the station, away from the rest of the group. Below them, the fleet stretched to the edge of visibility. Dren stood there for a while without speaking, and Jun-Ho stood with him and did not rush him. "Why are they dark?" Dren asked. "Finally, they're not powered down. I can see the drive signatures, but they're running silent." "Default state," Jun-Ho said. "No signal, no emission beyond minimum maintenance power. They've been like that for most of their existence." He Looked out at the fleet, nobody outside. The Sol system has ever had a reason to look carefully enough to find them, and we didn't advertise them. Dren was quiet again. Then he asked a different question, the one that had been forming in the back of his mind since the council session. How many of your people have died in space total in your history? Jun-Ho looked at him. He did not hesitate. He told him the number. It was not a number Dran had expected. It was the kind of number that had weight, real weight, the kind you felt somewhere in the chest when you heard it and understood what it meant. Colonies lost, ships lost, crews lost too. Machine intelligences and unknown phenomena, and the simple brutal difficulty of being a species that had pushed into the galaxy before the galaxy was ready to welcome them. Dran looked back out at the fleet. Dark still ships, the quiet rows, the construction yards below still running. Always running. He understood it now. He didn't like it the way you like something comfortable. He understood it. The way you understand a fact about the world that changes how you read everything that came before it. The fleet wasn't there to threaten anyone. It was there because grief had been poured into it for generations, and pride and a stubborn refusal to ever again be the civilization that couldn't protect its own people. We have a saying in the Keth military, Dran said after a moment, a warrior who has lost nothing has not yet learned what they are fighting for. Jun-Ho nodded once. He didn't say anything else. They stood there together at the window. A Keth general and a human admiral, looking out at 500,000 dark and silent ships floating above a gas giant. And neither of them needed to say anything more. When the delegation returned to the council transport that evening, Dran went directly to his quarters and sat down at his desk. He thought for a long time, then he opened a secure message channel and sent a private communication to Earth's military command. It was 4 words in the Keth language that translated approximately into something like, "We understand you now." He sent it and then sat in his quiet room and thought about the number Jun-Ho had told him, the number of the dead and the fleet that had been built so that the number would stop growing. Pell found Hana Lim in the station's small commissary before they departed, drinking tea and reading something on her tablet. Pell sat down across from her. She was shaking very slightly, not from cold. "How do you live with it?" Pell asked. "All of it out there. How do you wake up in the morning and live next to that and not feel afraid?" Hana looked up from her tablet. She thought about the question genuinely. "It's not fear," she said. "It's the opposite. It's why I sleep well." She smiled at Pell, warm and honest. "Nothing is coming for us that we aren't ready for. That's not a scary thing to me. That's the most comfortable thing in the world." Pell looked at her for a long moment. She did not fully understand, but she thought maybe she was starting to. The news broke to the wider galaxy 3 days after the inspection delegation returned to Veth Prime. Nobody was sure exactly who leaked it. First, the Council's communications office had issued a careful, measured statement about the audit results using the kind of dry, official language designed to reduce panic. It did not reduce panic. What reduced panic was not in the Council's toolbox right now, because what was needed was a different reality, and the Council could not supply that. By the time Yuna Shin sat down at her desk on the morning of the 4th day, the Galactic Information Networks had been running the story for 48 straight Ours, 522,000. Dreadnoughts, the humans, the quiet ones, the ones who sat in the back row and voted on resource treaties, 522,000. Dreadnoughts. The reaction across the galaxy had split into three very distinct groups, and Yuna's head of intelligence, Seung-Hui, laid it out for her over breakfast in his usual flat, factual way. Seung-Hui was 51 years old and had been doing intelligence work since he was 26. He had a thin face, a short gray beard, and the general energy of a man who found most things mildly predictable and was rarely surprised. He sat across from Yuna with a cup of black coffee and a data pad and delivered his briefing the way a doctor delivers a diagnosis. Clearly, without unnecessary drama, but without leaving anything important out. 3 factions, he said. The first is the fearful bloc, led loudly by the Vensite Confederation and the Droon Republic, both of whom have been in long-standing competition with the Kaith, and are now discovering that there is something much larger than the Kaith to worry about. They are calling for Earth to be sanctioned. They want a cap on human military assets and enforced decommissioning schedule and an independent council committee to oversee Earth's shipyards going forward. He turned a page on his pad. They will push this to a formal vote. Yuna nodded, and the second group, the Pragmatic Bloc, 14 civilizations, including the Marin Trade Union and the Historias Alliance, who have already sent diplomatic requests to Earth. All of them want the same basic thing. They want to be associated with us. Trade agreements, mutual defense clauses, cultural exchange programs. Some of them are very creative about what they're calling it, so it doesn't look like what it obviously is. What is it obviously? Teal asked from the corner of the room where he had been taking notes. Protection, Seung-Hui said simply. They want to be on the right side of the situation. He moved to the third section of his briefing. The third group is the one the first group is most angry about. 47 small civilizations, most of them long-standing members who have been quietly dealt with unfairly by larger council powers for decades. They have sent a joint public message of support to Earth. Yuna looked up from her coffee. 47. They've never voted together on anything in the council's history, Xiaoni said. Most of them barely know each other, but apparently having a reason to stand together was all they needed. He set down his pad. Ambassador Teva from the Lovely wrote the joint statement. I have a copy. It is surprisingly good. Yuna was quiet for a moment. She looked out the window of her office at the pale light of Veth Prime's sun coming through the station's outer viewport. She had known something like this would happen. She had thought about it, prepared for it, briefed Earth's government on the likely shape of it, but seeing it actually take form, the fearful ones and the seekers and the 47 who had been waiting for something without knowing what it was, different from the model she had built in her head. What are the fearful ones doing with their fleets? She asked. Xiaoni picked up his pad again. 3 of the loudest voices in the sanctions bloc have repositioned their military assets closer to home. Nothing aggressive, just pulling back, getting their ships within home system range. Good, Yuna said. Teal looked at her. Why is that good? Because it means they're scared enough to protect themselves, but not scared enough to do something stupid. She stood and picked up her jacket. We have a session in an hour. Let's not be late. The council session that day was behind closed doors, no public broadcast, no outside observers, just the main member, delegations and Grand Speaker Oren at the center floor with the weight of a galaxy's worth of anxiety in the room. The Vinci delegate, a tall, silver-scaled creature named Aura, opened with a sanctions proposal. It was well prepared. It cited galactic security, law, the registration and disclosure, principles of the Council Charter, the need for collective oversight of military assets beyond a certain scale. It was, Yuna had to admit, a reasonably solid legal argument. Oren let Aura finish without interruption. Then he turned to Yuna and asked if Earth wished to respond. Yuna stood. She walked to the floor. She had decided before this session that she would say as little as possible. The more she spoke, the more the conversation became about Earth defending itself, and this conversation did not need to go in that direction. Grand Speaker, I have one question for this body, she said. In 180 years of council membership, has Earth ever fired first? Has Earth initiated a conflict, threatened a member civilization, made a territorial claim, or taken a hostile action against any party inside the council or outside of it? Nobody spoke. The answer is no, Yuna said. The fleet has existed for most of our membership. The ships were being built when we joined. The doctrine has not changed. The only thing that has changed is that you know the numbers now. She paused. The ships were there before you knew about them. Nothing about Earth's behavior has changed. Nothing about our intentions has changed. The fleet has not moved. We have submitted for the audit as required by the rules we agreed to when we joined. She looked at Aura. 180 years is a long time to wait before showing aggression, if aggression was the plan. She returned to her seat. The vote on sanctions came 2 hours later. It failed. It failed not because Earth had lobbied hard against it. Suni's team had quietly tracked the vote count and advised Yuna that lobbying would hurt more than help, but because 47 small civilizations voted against it as a single block for the first time in council history, the number against was larger than anyone had expected. The Vinci delegate sat with a flat expression and stared at the result on the tally board. Outside the chamber, in the long curved corridor where delegates went to make calls they didn't want overheard, something unexpected happened. A young woman from the Payui delegation, a small two-sun system civilization that most of the council could not have found on a map without help, stopped Tio Quan in the hallway. She was about his age, with large, reflective eyes and the very careful posture of someone from a culture where body language carried a lot of meaning. Your delegation voted quietly, she said. You didn't fight, you just asked one question. Tio thought about it. That was the plan, yes. She studied him for a moment. Our senior delegate says that the way strong power behaves when it doesn't need to prove anything tells you everything about whether you should be afraid of them. She paused. We voted against the sanctions. Tio nodded. I know, thank you. She looked at him for another moment. Then she nodded and walked away. Meanwhile, in a very different part of the story, a leak had occurred. Nobody had authorized it. Nobody had planned it, and Sung Jae-oh, when he found out, made a face that suggested he was calculating how much damage it would cause before deciding how upset to be about it. A journalist on one of the larger Galactic Information Networks had obtained and published a short recorded interview with a young shipyard engineer from Earth. The engineer's name was Nara Jang. She was 28 years old, originally from a port city on Earth's southern peninsula, and she had been building hull plating for Dreadnoughts at the Jupiter shipyard ring for 3 years. The journalist had asked her what it felt like to build weapons of such enormous scale. Nara had looked at the camera with the relaxed expression of someone being asked what they had for lunch. I don't really think of it that way, she said. I think about the tolerances on the plating, whether the weld seams are clean. We had a batch last month with a slight variance in the alloy mix, and that was very annoying. I mostly think about that kind of thing. She paused. Also, I think about lunch quite a bit. The commissary at our section of the yard does a really good spicy rice bowl on Thursdays. The interview had spread across Galactic networks faster than almost anything Sungjai had seen in his career. Alien commentators and analysts could not stop talking about it. The Savari Information Network ran it 4 times in one broadcast cycle. The Keth Military Analysis Bureau reportedly watched it in full and then sat in silence for several minutes before resuming their regular work. Nobody could explain exactly why it was frightening. She was cheerful. She was normal. She was thinking about lunch. She was building the hull of a ship that could crack a moon, and she was thinking about the spicy rice bowl. Sungjai showed the clip to Yuna without comment and watched her watch it. When it ended, Yuna sat back in her chair. Leave it, she said. It's causing a reaction. I know, she looked at him. Leave it. It's fine, it's honest. That's exactly what building a ship is. It's a job. It's Thursdays and rice bowls and getting the alloy mix right. She turned back to her work. Let them be scared of that. Maybe they should be. The formal request arrived on a Thursday morning. It came through official council channels, signed by Grand Speaker Oren himself, addressed to Earth's military delegation. It was written in the careful, measured language of official procedure, but underneath the formal phrasing, the meaning was simple. The council wanted Earth's military command to explain on the record and in full the doctrine behind the fleet, not as a threat assessment, not as part of any sanctions process, simply for the galactic historical record, for understanding. Yuna Shin read the letter twice and then sent it to Admiral Junho Beek without any attached message, which was a communication style Junho had learned to read over years of working with her. No message meant your call. Junho sat with the letter for a long time. He was not a man who liked speaking in front of large groups. He had spent his career on ships and in command posts, in the specific quiet of people who work with enormous machines in cold silence and don't have much need for speeches. He had testified before committees, before answered questions, given briefings, but this was different. This was the full council. 2,000 delegates, plus however many more, were watching through the broadcast feed that the council had confirmed would run to all member systems. He thought about saying no. He thought about sending someone else, Murray, perhaps, who was better with words, or Hana, who could probably hold that room for hours on sheer enthusiasm. But he thought about what the letter was actually asking for, and he thought about whether anyone else could answer it the way it needed to be answered. He wrote back to Yuna, one sentence. I'll do it. She responded 2 minutes later, also one sentence, I know you would. The session was set for the following week, and the days before it Jun-ho did not prepare a speech in the traditional sense. He did not write out paragraphs or practice in front of a mirror. He sat in his quarters on the council station and thought about the things that were true and about the order in which they needed to be said, and about a man named Dongwon Park. Dongwon Park had been a shipyard foreman at the Jupiter Ring for 40 years. He had started as a welder at age 22, the same year the first post-silence war construction cycle began. He had worked his way to foreman by 35, and he ran his section of the yard until he retired at 62. He had never served aboard a ship. He had never fired a weapon. He had gone to work every morning and come home every evening and gone back the next day. He had welded hull plates and managed crews and filed paperwork and eaten his lunch in the yard commissary, and he had done this for 40 years, and when he retired, his section alone had produced over 300 ships. Dongwon Park had died 6 years ago. He was 71. He died in his apartment in a city on Earth's western coast with his family around him, having outlived the machine intelligence that had once threatened to end everything he loved. He never knew the full scope of what he had built. The number was classified until long after his death. Jun-ho had never met him. He knew him only through records and through the faded photograph that sat in the shipyard's small memorial hall at Incheon 7, next to the photographs of thousands of others like him. Workers, builders, people who had never been to war but had made every war survivable. He thought about Dongwon Park, and then he was ready. The council chamber was full. Every seat was occupied. The broadcast feed was running. Even the delegations that had been loudest in their opposition to Earth had sent their full teams. Whatever else was true about this moment, it was history, and nobody wanted to miss history. Jun-ho walked in alone. No aides, no colleagues. He was in his dress uniform, dark plain, without decoration beyond his rank insignia and one small pin on the left breast that nobody in the room recognized. He walked to the speaker's floor and stood in the center of it and looked out at 2,000 faces. He did not begin with a greeting or a formal acknowledgement of the grand speaker. He began the way a person begins when they have something true to say and want to waste as little time as possible getting to it. In 2287, he said, a machine intelligence emerged in our outer systems. We don't know where it came from. We probably never will. What we know is what it did. He paused. In 6 years it destroyed 9 of our colony systems. 9. We called the war it made the silence war because that's what it left behind it. Silence. Worlds that had been full of people, full of noise and argument and work and children and all the things people fill a place with when they live there. And then silence. The chamber was very still. He named the colonies. He spoke each name clearly, one after another, and let the names be what they were. Places where people had lived. He did not give population numbers. He did not need to. The names were enough. We survived, he said, not because we were clever, not because we found some strategy or discovered a weakness. We survived because we built, we put everything we had into building ships. And we kept building until the math changed, until there were more of us Then there was of it, and it couldn't keep up, and eventually it stopped. He looked out at the rows of faces. And when the war was over, we made a decision we decided we would never make. The mistake of being unprepared again. Not for anything, not ever. He let that land. I want to talk about a man named Dongwon Park. He described him simply. The years, the work, the unremarkable daily rhythm of a man who spent 40 years making sure the welds were clean. He never fired a weapon. He never commanded anyone in battle. He went to work. He came home. He built 300 ships. Junho stopped. There are thousands of people like Dongwon in the history of our shipyards, people who built things they might never see used for wars, that might never come because they understood that the alternative, being caught without enough again, was something their civilization had already paid for in the worst possible way. He looked across the chamber slowly. The fleet is not pointed at anyone in this room. It was never pointed at you. We have no territorial ambitions. We have no grievances against the council or its members. We have been here for 180 years, and in that time we have not fired first, not once, not at anyone. He paused. What we have is a promise we made to our own people after the Silence War. We told them we will not let this happen again. We will build enough. We will always build enough. And we will keep that promise as long as we exist as a civilization. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and took out a small folded piece of paper, actual paper, which was unusual enough in this environment that several delegates leaned slightly forward to look at it. These are some of the names, he said, from the Silence War. Not all of them. There are too many, but some. I want to read them because they are the real reason the fleet exists, not strategy, not politics. These people. He read names for 4 minutes, just names. No titles, no explanations. A long, steady list of names in the quiet of the largest political chamber in the known galaxy. When he finished, he folded the paper and put it back in his pocket. We are not looking for anyone's fear. He said, we are not looking for power or dominance or the kind of respect that comes from being afraid of something. We are a civilization that has buried a very large number of its people, and we are doing our best to make sure that number stops growing. He looked at Oren. That's all that is. The entire doctrine. He stepped back from the center of the floor. The chamber was silent for a long time. Yuna Shin was sitting in the gallery, above the speaker's floor, not in her usual delegation seat. She had wanted to watch from above. She sat very still, with her hands folded in her lap, and watched the chamber sit in its silence. And she thought about Dongwon Park, whom she had read about in a historical file years ago, and about the photograph in the memorial hall, and about the hundreds of thousands of ships floating dark and silent above Jupiter. Grand Speaker Oren rose slowly from his seat. He was old and deliberate in all his movements, and when he spoke, his voice carried the full weight of his years and his office. For 300 years, he said, this council has carried the designation of guardian signatory, a status granted only to civilizations that have demonstrated through sustained action rather than words a commitment to the protection of the vulnerable and the preservation of peace. There are 2 guardian signatories currently recognized. The last was granted 304 years ago. He paused. This council will open formal Proceedings to consider Earth for Guardian signatory status. The preliminary vote will be held before end of session today. It passed. The preliminary vote was not. Close. Jun-ho walked out of the council chamber into the long corridor outside, where the light was quieter and there were fewer people. His aide fell into step beside him, holding a the pad with 17 messages, flagged urgent, and Jun-ho looked at the pad and said, "In a minute," and kept walking until he reached a quiet alcove at the end of the hall. He took out his personal communicator and made a call to Earth. The connection took a moment. The distance was not trivial, and then a voice answered, warm and slightly tired, the way voices sound in the early morning. "How did it go?" his sister Bora asked. Jun-ho leaned against the wall of the alcove and looked at the ceiling. Outside, through a narrow viewport, he could see a small piece of the galaxy, a scatter of faint light in the dark. "Fine," he said. "It went fine. Are you eating well?" Bora made a sound that was half a laugh and half exasperation. "That's all you have to say. It went fine." "There was a vote," he said. "It was a good one." And he thought about Don Juan Park. He thought about the names he had read. He thought about the dark fleet above Jupiter and the cold and the silence between the stars and the long, stubborn, tireless work of keeping a promise across generations. "And we're okay," he said. "Tell everyone at home we're okay." He ended the call and stood there for a moment longer in the quiet corridor. The galaxy spread out behind the glass, and then he straightened up and went back to find his aide, because the work was not finished, and it never really was, and that was fine too. That was how it was supposed to be.